So it is wonderful to be back here, especially for National Crime Victims Week. This is the third decade of celebrating that, of recognizing that week and crime victims more specifically. It's been a time when we can take the opportunity to promote some of the good things people are doing on behalf of crime victims, and awareness of their rights, which is something that across American society is something that has evolved a bit in the last several decades, to where we think of it as a player in the criminal justice system who has rights of notice and being informed and participation when they would like to do that. And of course, and I noticed a lot of hands go up, and the victim advocates, people helping them through the criminal justice system, where we wish they didn't ever have to get through in the first place. It's also important to dedicate some time to recognize the tireless work of our law enforcement, who many of whom are here from beyond Loudoun as well, and I appreciate the work you all do, and the sheriff, the people in your department, putting themselves on the line to keep us all safe every day. That's a big deal. You know, in church on Sunday, you probably hear prayer for the military, keep them safe, and we do want to do that, especially in Virginia. It's a very martial state, but and a lot of them are confronting evil in different parts of the world, but evil exists right here in our own communities, and it is our local law enforcement that stands in the breach. So when you're saying those prayers, keep them in mind too, because they need it too. They need it too. I also appreciate the work the victim rights advocates do. This is an area that I've seen as a lawyer grow in recognition of its importance. And I'll tell you, one particular area I work in the AG's office, we have started from scratch the effort to fight human trafficking. There was nothing going on in the AG's office when I arrived. In fact, there was some resistance to legislation I had tried as a state senator. And in those cases, like domestic abuse cases, like sexual abuse cases, the victim rights advocate plays an absolutely critical role, not just in making the case, because if those people aren't comfortable enough to testify, to believe there's another path for them to get on, that they aren't going to just end up in the same place, you're not going to make that case. And more importantly, you're not going to get that person who may have been involved in crime themselves, but who is also a victim, out of that cycle. And so when we do trainings now across Virginia for law enforcement officers, for prosecutors, we also include the victim witness advocates when we're dealing with human trafficking, because we know how important a role that they play. And so this is a good week to remember that. It's a unique area, and it's somewhat new, but it is the fastest growing crime in the world, and it's right here in Virginia. It's in northern Virginia. We're not immune from this, and we're being very aggressive in the AG's office to try and fight it. But it's literally the best example I can name for you of the significance, I would say high profile significance, of our victim rights advocates in those types of cases. And again, not the only ones. They play an important role in every case, but this is a somewhat new and developing area. And then, unfortunately, they have plenty of work, because thousands of Virginians experience emotional, financial, physical trauma as crime victims every year. And National Crime Victims Rights Week helps us to remind the rest of our society about the victims of crime. We think in terms of we want to prevent it, we want to stop it, punish the bad folks, but what about the damage they do along the way? And in the Attorney General's office, we see everything from victims of child pornography, whether it's of the distribution or of the initial creation of it, to victims of fraud. Jim mentioned a lot of that. We do focus on fraud prevention a great deal. We work with domestic violence and sexual abuse victims, victims of gang violence, which is the worst violent crime threat in Virginia still by a long shot. And of course, you have that here in Loudoun. There's really nowhere in Virginia that's immune from it. So it's very important to be pushing there. I mentioned human trafficking, and even nursing home abuse and neglect. So we see victims of every kind in my office, in our daily work all the time. And we have the opportunity to work with Jim Plowman and other prosecutors across the Commonwealth, and Sheriff Chapman and other law enforcement across the Commonwealth, in ways that bring us into contact with other victims across the state. And we're trying to work hard every day to protect Virginians, just like Jim and the folks in his office are, and your sheriff and the folks in his office are doing here in Loudon. And we also want to try, as a big part of that, to keep crime from happening. I mean, any law enforcement involved person will tell you the best crime of all is the one that never happened, is preventing them. They're the hardest to measure, of course, but I'll give you an example there. We have been very aggressive in our office in going after internet predators, child pornographers, and just take child pornography. It's hard to nail down percentages, but people who are consuming large amounts of this, 30, 40, 50% of them, if we don't interdict them, will try to act out on a child in the real world. So going after that crime prevents a future one. And you can imagine we all find that pretty motivating. We're working to toughen criminal penalties where that's appropriate, particularly in the human trafficking area, to catch more of it in Virginia in ways that are useful. We're also training local law enforcement how to spot it, and prosecutors how to use the laws we already have on the books. A lot of times we all fall into the trap thinking, well, this new thing, we need new laws. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We have ramped up a number of our investigative and prosecutorial efforts. Again, the real goal is to try and keep future crimes from happening. Now, part of the way you do that is putting away the people who've been doing them in the first place. But there are also significant deterrent undertakings, preventive efforts. For instance, when it relates to gangs, we talk about prosecution all the time, and we do that very aggressively, and hopefully we're going to be stepping that up a bit. One of the prosecutors in my office, even though he's going to get called out, but Mark Birnbaum is in the back, who's done a great job in this front for us up in Northern Virginia, and we'll be continuing to do that, I know, in a different capacity, working more closely, frankly, with Jim and with the sheriff here. So, but a lot of these opportunities present a lot of these present opportunities to prevent crime. For instance, just by getting into schools and talking kids through making the decision not to join a gang. And we produce materials to try and aid that effort. And we've been pretty successful at advancing it. It's hard to tell how much success you're having in prevention because it's hard to measure what doesn't happen. But that is not a reason not to continue to grow our effort in that regard. And so that's something we focus on a lot. I know you see some of that here in Loudon. And I appreciate the partnership with both your Commonwealth Attorney and your Sheriff here locally to do that. And in Leesburg, your Chief of Police too. So, and I know Mayor Fallon's here for Falls Church. Appreciate you being here too. The kids aren't the only vulnerable citizens. They tend to be the most motivating for us. But I mentioned things like elder abuse and preventing neglect and so forth, and Medicaid fraud is the biggest area of prosecution for our office, where people are stealing money that would otherwise go to help the poor. It's not a direct crime victim, but then we can't serve. Indirectly, we can't serve people who really need to be served. And we're a pretty parsimonious state as it is when it comes to those things. So we want to make sure that stays available. And so that is the only part of my office that has grown while I've been AG. And it's grown a lot, unfortunately, because there's a lot of demand. So we're working harder and trying to work smarter to find and prosecute criminals to reduce future victimization. A better way that we try to focus on doing that is prevention. But we also have in our office people who work with victims like you all do here locally to try and help us get through the process successfully, prosecuting people who deserve it, and also try to help them get back on their feet entirely and to recover and regain their confidence in their own society and make sure they can get control of their own lives so they re-enter this, not re-enter, but can rejoin us all confidently throughout society, whether it's in Loudon or anywhere else in Virginia. We don't want them to feel like they've got to look over their shoulder. And again, that's a big part of what a lot of us in law enforcement do. And the victim rights advocates play an enormous role in helping helping those people reach that point mentally, emotionally, and I appreciate that effort. That's draining work. It's emotionally draining work. And so we're very glad that you all have folks here to do that. So again, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I look forward to recognizing some of these folks, and I want to thank you all for the invitation to be here. Jim, thank you.
Thank you.